Despite the High Court judgment that an inconvenient truth contains significant errors, exaggerations and is politically partisan, the errors and exaggerations still seem to be getting through to children, such as these youngsters from Northern Ireland who've been educated in the British system.
The ice melts from the earth being too hot, and it washes over and it goes down into the sea.
I'm worried because it might happen here, and most of us will die.
There's a lot of people that can't swim, and like they'll just go down, and like you can't just fly float forever, because like it's just like so tiring.
Let's talk a little bit about the data that you've described in the article that'll be about you that'll be appearing in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow. The latest controversy seems to be over the warming trend of the past 10 years. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has predicted one range of warming. Could you tell us what exactly they predicted and what seems to have recorded based on the recorded data that we've got?
Well, the Intergovernmental Panel has predicted a warming, which you can read about, and you can also measure the warming we've had in the last 10 years. There's been really no statistical warming that you can detect for either the ground-based data or for satellite data. And that's way outside of the predictions of the IPCC, which would have had several tenths of a degree warming over that same period of time.
That's interesting. Well, what's at the center of this, of course, is the amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, that's in the atmosphere. And you argue in your piece that it's not really a pollutant per se and that it could even be beneficial. Try to explain that for us.
Well, first of all, carbon dioxide is a completely natural gas. Each of us exhales carbon dioxide every time we take a breath. And plants need carbon dioxide to live. You know, if we had a third of the carbon dioxide level we have now, plants would die. So we're not far from the lower limit in which plants can even live, and we're a very, very long way from the upper limit. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of at the low end of the CO2 levels that we've experienced in geological history.
One last thing I'd like to ask you about that you raise in the article, and that is the computer models that are used to drive the arguments for global warming. Could you explain to us a little bit the nature of these? I mean, these are actually software programs that are inputted into commercials. If you outputted them, it would probably create a stack of papers about a foot high. This is a lot different from actually observing physical phenomena out in the real world, is it not?
Very different. Yet the predictions of the computers have not agreed very well at all with what's being observed.
Professor Happer, the next time I see umbrellas strewn from one end of Fifth Avenue to the next, I'll keep in mind nothing new. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Let's see what it is really. I mean, this was done years ago by a late colleague at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, Stan Groch, and he wanted to go over the process. So here you see a cloud of dots. What are they? Well, let's first do the exercise of looking at the axes. So you notice that it's going from -6 to 6 degrees centigrade. That's the scale. The cloud of points is extending over -2 to 2 degrees. Each point is a station's annually averaged anomaly. So that's this huge set of points. To get the globally average temperature anomaly, you average these points, usually with a weighting for area. On the same scale, that's what you get for the average. You'll notice it's again going this time -4 to 4, but it's roughly, each interval is 2 degrees. Normally, you would compare these two and say that the first cloud was largely random and almost all the variability averaged out. But that would not be an interesting story. So what you do is you stretch the scale on the right by a factor of 10. Okay, and that's what you get. That looks much more familiar. And then we obsess on that, as though it was an omen of something. And we argue, where was the rate of change greater and where is the peak? But remember, what we're talking about is that.
And the trouble is, all of us scientists are government employees, even if we're working for private universities. All research is supported by the government. So as such, we're very sensitive to what politicians say and believe. Well, that's a shortcoming. You have to figure out how to fund science in a way that there are no incentives to artificially promoting things. When you hear, for instance, a scientist saying the science is settled, you know that person has stepped out of the science. I think that registers with ordinary people. And whenever you see someone say, instead of answering arguments, how could so many people agree if it weren't true? It should be a red flag. My view is one has conflated the trivial, which is that temperature is changing, climate is changing, man plays some role. There's not much disagreement with predictions of disaster that are not connected clearly to warming or to our activities or to anything else, and leaving people with the thought that if the first part is true, the second part must be true. That is certainly not the case. And then to add insult to injury, to propose policies that would have nothing to do with any of it, but involve trillions of dollars and harm to many people, is, I think, crossing the line.
Let me quote my hero, Professor Freeman Dyson, the brilliant professor of physics at the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton. For those of you who don't know, that's where Albert Einstein spent his last days, and you have to be very good to get there. Professor Freeman says, climate models do a very poor job of describing the clouds, the dust, the chemistry, the biology of the fields, the farms, the forests. They do not begin to describe the real world in which we live, one that is muddy and messy and full of things that we do not yet understand. He goes on to say, it's much easier for scientists to sit in an air-conditioned building and run computer models than to put on winter clothes and actually measure what's going on outside in the swamps and clouds. And that is why the computer model experts wind up believing their own models. It's too hard to get out. But If CSIRO really believed in their climate projections, why do all the reports contain legal disclaimers protecting them from all responsibility should anyone dare to act on what they said was going to happen? Perhaps CSIRO should follow the advice of our beloved Prime Minister. Don't write crap. It can't be that hard. I have to tell you, from a personal standpoint, it really pains me to come to Canberra here and think about how the CSIRO has deteriorated so badly. The organization that employed me for 35 years, the last 15 of which I had the rank of Chief Research Scientist. I worked on computer modeling, by the way. The CSIRO that I joined in 1971 was a very lean, world-class organization, and it was run by scientists for the benefit of Australia. As such, I can tell you that it attracted many brilliant scientists. Some of them, I have to tell you, were a bit weird, but they certainly did great things for Australian agriculture and industry, as well as for blue sky science. Now, here's an important thing. CSIRO was called a quango. That's a bureaucratic term meaning quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organization, financed by government, but set to act independently of government. That meant that in my day, our research and publications were judged on the quality of their science and how useful it was, and not whether or not it agreed with government policy. But we came under increasing pressure at the end of the 1980s, and it was pretty terrible. We had to become more businesslike. The doors were open to management consultants. The effect was similar to wounding a healthy organism and then leaving it open to attack by parasites, and brother did the parasites pour in. Over the next 10 years, layer upon layer of management was created, some intersecting others. You think your tax dollars went to fund research? Well, guess what? A lot of it was diverted toward letting them pay their management gains. The money that used to be used to send CSIRO scientists to go and study their science elsewhere was now spent on sending these people to fancy business schools in the United States and Europe. They did learn one thing. They did learn how to bring even the most talented senior scientists under their control. Independent science, by the way, was still okay. It was okay to think independently. That is, as long as what you thought agreed with what the management thought. We scientists were given very strict guidelines, and I have to tell you this, very strict. We got lots of memos on not publishing any public discussion, not publishing anything or public discussion of any research that could be seen as critical of government policy. Those who did not do it could be subject to dismissal. Now, a lot of people here who are critical of this meeting will say that I'm exaggerating. So let's talk about 2009. Clive Spash, an economist, was employed by CSIRO. He published a peer-reviewed paper that was critical of an emissions trading scheme. CSIRO and the government were not amused by this. Clive Spash was sacked, and even the ABC covered that one. He's now professor of Norway at the University of Life Sciences.
Where was the media?
You tell me. When you hear scientists tell you about the terrors of global warming from carbon dioxide, you ask them one question. Who pays your salary? Because he who pays the piper calls the tune. I migrated to this country 40 years ago and became an Australian citizen, and I was very proud. But one of my proudest moments is seeing all of you here today representing our vibrant democracy. Thank you.